Crime of the Century, How It Was Solved. Introduction. Every era has its high-profile crimes, but some cases remain in history as crimes of the century. They shock with their audacity, make you wonder how the criminals managed to pull off something so incredible, and arouse admiration for the detective's ability to solve even the most intricate mysteries. But what if at the center of this story is hidden not only cold logic, but also a mystical component that makes the blood run cold? Today we will tell you about a case that not only shocked the public, but also forced detectives to face something they could not explain. This is a story about how one crime became more than just a robbery and turned into a puzzle on the edge of reality and nightmare. Part 1. The Essence of the Crime. A dark, rainy night. The city was drowning in silence, broken only by the occasional splash of water under the feet of passers-by. It seemed that nothing foreshadowed trouble. But it was on this very night that a robbery took place in one of the most secure banks in the city, which is still considered one of the most mysterious. The criminals acted with frightening precision. They knew everything, from the time the guards changed to the smallest loopholes in the security system. In the morning, the bank employees found the vault completely empty. There was not a single clue left. No traces of a break-in, no alarm, no extraneous noise. But it seemed that the building itself kept some kind of dark secret, as if something or someone was watching all this from the shadows. Part 2. The First Clues. The detectives began the investigation with a meticulous study of the crime scene. Everything looked perfect, but the experienced eye of the detective noticed one oddity, a barely noticeable scratch on the emergency exit door. It was so thin that it could be taken for an accident, but it was not. It was the first key. The surveillance cameras recorded a strange car that drove past the bank that night. The driver was a former employee of a security company, recently fired under mysterious circumstances. His connections to the crime were becoming increasingly obvious, but the deeper the detectives dug, the more oddities they discovered. Some data from the surveillance system simply disappeared, and the recordings that were still recovered were saturated with a strange background noise, as if someone was whispering directly into the lens. Meanwhile, a shadow flashed in the interrogation room, causing the detectives to involuntarily look around. The interrogations were becoming increasingly tense. One of the suspects broke down and whispered, "You won't understand. We ourselves were pawns in someone else's game. This is not our plan. We just followed orders." "But whose orders?" He said nothing more. Part 3. Secrets in the Minds of Criminals. The detectives knew that they were not just a group of criminals, but real masters of manipulation. But what motivated them? To answer this, they brought in profilers who compiled a psychological portrait of the criminals. Men with a military background, technical genius, and a cold-bloodedness that can scare anyone. However, even such geniuses are not immune to mistakes. One of them left behind a trace, a strange letter that said, "Every step is like a knife edge. One mistake, and we will all be lost." These words became not only a clue for the detectives, but also a new reason to think. What kind of danger was he talking about? Meanwhile, the case took a new turn when one of the witnesses suddenly disappeared. At his place of residence, they found only overturned furniture and a clock frozen at 3:15. The supposed time of the robbery. Was it a random fear or part of something bigger? The answers continued to elude. Part 4. Unexpected Betrayal. Every conspiracy collapses when human greed intervenes. One of the gang members, realizing that their hunt for riches had turned into a deadly game, decided to turn in his accomplices. He told them in a trembling voice how they had been preparing for this job for months, but something had gone wrong. They got greedy. Someone started playing their own game. I told them, "Don't touch this place," but they didn't listen, he admitted. His words led to a hiding place where not only the stolen money was hidden, but also strange objects. Among them, a book covered in ancient symbols and a box of black dust that made one of the detectives dizzy as soon as he opened it. But the most frightening find were the photographs. Each of them captured moments of the robbery, angles that were impossible to take without being present at the scene itself. This suggested that the criminals had an accomplice who seemed to vanish into thin air. On the last page of the book, written in blood, were the words, "This is only the beginning." Part 5, Arrests and Trial. The operation to apprehend the criminals took place in the dark morning. Knocking on doors, screams, attempto. The arrested looked like people who knew they would be caught, but still tried to escape the inevitable. Their faces reflected fear, not of the law, but of something greater that had been hanging over them since the robbery. The trial was short. The evidence was irrefutable. However, each of the accused claimed that they had become victims of something invisible. One of them shouted at the trial, "It will come for you, as it came for us." What he meant by that remained unknown. Part 6. New Mysteries. After the case was closed, a strange document fell into the hands of journalists that could shed light on the mystery of what happened. It was a notebook found in the safe of one of the suspects. Its pages were filled with notes in an incomprehensible language, reminiscent of ancient spells. On one of the pages was a map of the city with several marked points. What united these places? Each of them was connected with disappearances or unexplained events in recent years. One of the locations turned out to be an old mansion that had long been considered cursed. The detectives decided to check it out. In the basement of the mansion, they found a room with strange symbols written on the walls and a candle in the center, as if someone had recently left this place. Among the burnt papers, they found names, the same ones that appeared in the case. Part 7. The Hunt Continues. The investigation seemed to be over, but these findings opened a new chapter. Was this crime an act of revenge, someone's game, or something more sinister? There were rumors among the detectives that a cult was behind it, which had been manipulating society for centuries. They operate in the shadows, leaving behind only whispers and fear. The detectives began to work through the archives to find the deeper roots of the mysterious events. In one of the missing persons cases from 20 years ago, similar details emerged. Mysterious signs at the places of disappearance, evidence of strange rituals and sudden memory loss in surviving witnesses. This gave rise to a new theory. The criminals could be part of a centuries-old conspiracy. While investigating the case, one of the detectives suddenly began to feel dizzy and see images reminiscent of crime scenes. These visions led him to an abandoned building in the city center, the existence of which none of his colleagues even suspected. Part 8. The Last Clues. The building turned out to be an old library, closed after a fire in the early 1900s. Among the charred shelves, the detectives found a diary of an unknown person, which described sinister experiments with the human mind and mentioned names that matched the defendants in the current case. But the strangest thing was the mirrors placed throughout the building. Some of them had inscriptions that could only be read under a certain angle of light. "Trust no one. We are always watching," one of them read. The detectives realized that they had become part of a game played by someone who remains behind the scenes. They had to take a risk and meet the man whose name was mentioned in the diaries. This man turned out to be one of those who supposedly knew the truth. But when they met, his house was empty and the door was wide open. Only on the table lay a photograph with an inscription on the back. "You are close, but this is not the end." Part 9. Chasing the Truth. This clue led to the next location, an old warehouse by the river where thousands of things confiscated over the decades were stored. Among a pile of dust and abandoned boxes, the detectives found something incredible: recordings of conversations that could shed light on the true customers of the crime. These conversations mentioned a certain observer, a man who knew everything in advance. Who is he? Why does his name pop up in every mention? To find him, the detectives had to go against their own rules, delving deeper and deeper into a web of intrigue and conspiracies. In the warehouse, they also found a map indicating the next meeting place: an old hospital, long closed due to rumors of terrible experiments. It was there that they met the one they believed to be the observer, but instead of answers, they received new questions. Part 10. The End or the Beginning. The final meeting ended unexpectedly. The observer disappeared, leaving behind only a video recording in which he said, "You have taken a step forward, but the truth lies deeper than you can imagine. Keep looking." This ending left the detectives with the feeling that this was only the beginning of an even more complex puzzle. Questions remained unanswered, but one thing became clear. The crime of the century did not just change their understanding of the world, it turned into a personal challenge for each of them. Epilogue, the last chord. Before the robbery, the bandit did the unthinkable. He shot a policeman who happened to be near the bank. This cold-blooded act added a special tragedy to the investigation and showed how far the criminals were willing to go to achieve their goals. After the trial, a few weeks later, something unexpected happened. One of the detectives noticed a strange incident on the news. The luxury car, a black McLaren, was found burned out in a vacant lot. In the passenger compartment lay something terrible. Black, charred remains of a person that were impossible to identify. However, the strangest thing was that next to the scene, there was a photograph of an elderly woman. Detectives soon found out that this was the same grandmother who lived near the crime scene. But what they could not explain was that, according to eyewitnesses, the grandmother saw the robber when he got into the McLaren and tried to stop him. On the back of the photo was written, "She knew the truth, now she is gone." According to witnesses, after the robber got into the McLaren, he drove off to another city. The tracks disappeared. No one saw him again, but his name remained forever linked to this case. This incident was the final chord in the case. Or was it a new mystery that opened another chapter of the crime of the century?